Hey, this is another episode from the desk. And I'm going to try not to get up in the camera here and look too close because that kind of freaks people out. But ultimately, let's talk about why we must reduce waste. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. One thing that you might not realize, and I know a lot of Americans don't realize this, a lot of people around the world don't realize this, but every piece of waste, every resource has a long supply chain that goes into it. There's a wonderful book, I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's about how a pencil is made. There isn't just one person who makes pencils. Pencils are made from the beginning where the graphite is mined to the trees are cut down to all along that supply chain contributes to a simple pen or pencil. And what frustrates me about today's modern world is that we often throw away a lot. So these pens only last me for like a couple weeks, and then they're empty, and I got to throw away. So all this plastic is not any value. So what's the solution? So first off, resource costs will increase with inflation and the changes in labor costs, and eventually there will be pinches in the supply chain like what we're experiencing right now. So yes, the lockdowns with COVID have messed up the supply chain. Yes, there have been shortages due to labor constraints associated with a global pandemic. However, I would argue that some of these constraints were actually there long before the COVID shuts down and the government reactions, and they're just made worse by the government reaction. So hospitals, for example, before in 2018, hospitals, like 40 to 50 hospitals were shutting down every year, and there weren't enough hospital beds in general. Then comes a global pandemic. Okay, some of the supply chain issues associated with nitrogen fertilizer, phosphorus, and other types of agricultural product, we're already seeing climbing prices because availability of those items was less and less available. We had during the Trump administration very low gas prices because U.S. was dominating their production of oil to the point that it became unprofitable to frack. So it became unprofitable to get more oil out of the ground because there was so much oil in the system, it lowered the prices down. Now, of course, that changed with Biden because now the U.S. domestic oil production is near zero. But the key to understand here is that all of these resources have a long supply chain. So none of these problems are something that happened overnight or just in the last year. And that there will be overconsumption that leads to exploitation, but there will be exploitation that leads to sometimes lower prices. So will you accept the consumption behaviors and mentalities that are actually very harmful to the long-term economic viability of the whole world? So here's another example. To make two tires, see, tires are made out of natural rubber because natural rubber is very resistant to the wear and tear and the abuses, the pressure and the strength that the tire has to face. It takes two rubber trees 1 year to produce a single tire. Think about that. Think about that. The worker who gets the trees gets a typical $9 per day in their work. Now, if you take the now you might say, oh my God, Justin, you're right. There's an exploitation here, and that worker is only getting $9 a day, and they are going to, they're being taken advantage of, which could be the case. But if you look at it, if it takes two trees 1 year to make a single tire, and the worker is $9 a day, let's say they're tapping 100 trees a day, and you do the math, you realize that you're getting that tire for less than the cost to manufacture it. And so that pressure is driving down wages. It's driving down the amount of money that the tire manufacturer can pay for the raw materials so that you can get a tire for $180 or for $90 or for $50. It just really depends on what quality tire you're going to get or what size vehicle it is. But think about that. It isn't necessarily that the rubber plantation is exploiting that worker. It's the marketplace. And guess who's a part of the marketplace? Well, us as consumers as well. So if you have tires on your vehicle and you don't take care of them, you don't keep them properly inflated, and they wear too much or they wear unevenly, then you're contributing as much to the plight of the rubber farmer as the rest of the supply chain is. Now, we should be really spreading down that opportunity across all ways, but the one thing that you can't control is how you interact with the resources that you use. So, for example, I've met people that have they got a deal on a set of 4 tires. They got a good price on a set of 4 tires, but they don't need 4 tires right now. So they got 4 tires in their garage for later. And that may or may not be a good idea, depending on how many vehicles you have, depending on the type of, there's a lot of depends. But those are resources that are taken out of the supply chain that, if are not used for the intended purpose, is actually wasted in the system. So I'm on this big trend right now of downsizing. So I'm a little bit older. I got a big house. I want a smaller house. I want more time on the land. So I'm starting to, you can already see my sparsely decorated place, but I'm starting to reduce the amount of things I have in my house. And I have things that like many Americans, that I have not used. They're gifts that I got from people. They're shoes that, you can only wear 1 pair of shoes at a time. And so if you have 4 pairs of shoes, you're only wearing a quarter of your shoe inventory at any given time. I probably got at least 4 pairs of nice fancy dress shoes. And obviously by my snazzy, I'm making a goal to mention my snazzy tracksuit in every one of my videos so that I can write it off as a tax deduction. That's a joke, by the way. But my point being is that surplus that you have in your home that's not serving your interests needs to be recirculated in the system to provide you something of greater value. So this is what we talk about in Prosperity Homestead. You've got a piece of land. You're really only living on an acre of the land. What can we do with the rest of the land? What can we do with the house? What can we do with the things around us in order to better suit our needs and objectives? So I've met farmers that have farm implements in the woods, and we find farm implements in the woods that people forgot they had. Wouldn't it be better to sell that along to somebody else who can use it? Set it up in a cooperative so that it can be rented out and then the maintenance paid for by multiple people, or simply don't have the equipment in the first place if you're not going to use it consistently. Now, there's waste in the supply chain. Again, you and I can't do a lot about the waste in the supply chain unless we're going to get actively involved in that supply chain. So if your business is in the supply chain, then what can your business do to reduce the waste? Because see, every bit of that waste in the supply chain is increasing the costs for everybody at the receiving end of that supply chain. One of the things that we do on properties is called an energy audit. So we don't want any waste to come off your property. We want whatever comes in the door to get used to its fullest potential on the property, and then if it exits, you're getting paid to exit it. Now, I'm not saying you're going to burn your waste or anything like that. There's some ridiculous concepts people come up with. But again, the longer you can get use out of an object, that's why we buy quality tools instead of any tool you can get your hand on. But the better you can get use out of the object, the more we're kind of paying tribute and respect to all those people along the supply chain. The longer the supply chain is, the less the bottom gets paid. So if you're concerned about the rubber farmer who's getting $9 a day for their work, they're getting up at 4 a.m, by the way, tapping these trees, and they're working till it's sunup. And then they're working into the middle of the day. If you're concerned about that person, then you need to shorten the supply chain. So your local food consumption. Are you buying food from a Walmart, from a Kroger, from a Food Lion that has food that's been trucked across the country, that in many cases you're paying less for that food than it costs to produce it? Did you know a chicken in the United States is like $5? But a chicken raised on an organic farm can cost $30 a chicken. That's the labor put into caring for the chicken, that is the food put into the chicken, and then that is the actual processing costs all put together. And you're saying, well, Justin, why is it $30? Well, because a long supply chain very often gets subsidies from governments. There's incentives. So very often the chicken is not very high quality. And ultimately, the chicken may have grown only in 3 months. Where an organic farm is going to have a chicken. It takes a little bit longer to grow. You might not get a premium looking bird, but again, the taste, the quality, the the inputs have been much better for the environment and much better for the chicken itself. Now, again, if that's a really long supply chain, the people on the bottom get less money because everybody along the way got to get paid. And there's nothing wrong with everybody along the way getting paid, but if they're not adding value to something and they're simply a distributor and they're simply warehousing a product, then they're not going to get paid very much. So can you buy closer to the source? Now, ideally, everybody should have their own chickens, their own garden, their own, but again, if you're working full time, most of my landowning clients, they're working full time. They can't be, they might live in a city but have land in the country that they're using for recreational purpose. They might get a deer or two a year, but they can't really, they're not everyday farmers. You've got to figure out, how do you shorten the supply chain? If you have a concern about that farmer not making very much money, you tighten up that supply chain. You shorten that supply chain. You buy value. You buy direct. These are huge value positions. By the way, I mentioned the rubber industry. There's actually a big supply chain risk with the rubber industry because the price of rubber is so low that they're not able to, it's not worth growing rubber trees on the land because they're not getting enough money for it to cover the taxes on the land or the labor it needs to harvest it. So there's actually rubber trees getting cut down, and there's about 40% of rubber comes out of the same region, and ultimately that region is susceptible to risk because the rubber trees are clones. So like bananas, for example, they're clones. And so if a disease comes through, it wipes everything out. So with 40% of rubber being in the same geographic region and the majority of rubber activities going through a few companies, there's supply chain risks there. So, are you going to get your tires and take better care of them so that they last longer? Or are you going to just get used tires? Or are you going to not get tires at all by reducing your travel? A lot of things to consider there. Now, I'm not about you're not going to save the environment by lowering your carbon footprint. Carbon footprint thing's all made up anyway. It's a marketing ploy from the oil and fuel companies. But again, doing an energy audit, reducing the inputs coming into the property, maximizing those inputs so you get maximum value out of them, and then create the abundance in the environment that you have. That's how we don't have to worry about the waste as much, because there'll be less waste in that system. So I have 3 little points here I'm going to wrap up with. First, you want to get more from what you have, buying quality furniture, buying fewer pieces of furniture, having a smaller square foot house. That's going to make it easier for you not to be as dependent on a supply chain, not to be as concerned about the prices in the marketplace, because you kind of have what you need and you don't have to worry about it. You also want to understand the whole life cycles to reduce waste. So sometimes a supply chain is going to have an overabundance of resources, and you can buy things when they're lower priced. But you want to understand, like buying direct, there's going to be less waste involved because there wasn't the transportation miles. There wasn't a need to pallet things up and move them. Actually, the couch I'm sitting on right now, we went into the warehouse. I got to rent it. Once we figured out which ones we want, we went into the warehouse. I backed the truck up to the place. We picked up the couches and brought them home. Okay, I could have gone to a showroom. I could have gone to all these other places, but I ended up buying direct from a factory, and I got a better quality product at a lower price. So there's some strategies when you understand the supply chain. And finally, you want to be aware of supply chain weaknesses. Now, if you're an investor, these weaknesses create opportunities for you, but also you don't want to be without things like food. You don't want to be waiting in a line for fuel. You've got to understand these things. Now, the great news is, as a homeowner, as a property owner, you can leverage. And so let's say you have a big farm. Rather than worrying about fuel prices, you just get a fuel contract with a local distributor, and they deliver fuel to the farm, and then you don't have to worry about what happens at the gas station. See, there are simple solutions, but first you got to understand why it's important to reduce waste, why it's important to understand supply chains, and why, if you want to make change, it's going to happen at your home. Okay? Those guys getting $9 a day, $9 US a day for harvesting rubber, takes a 1 year, 2 trees to make 1 tire, and then that tire gets sold for less than what it costs the daily wage. Their wages are going down. You've got to understand this kind of stuff. If you're an IT worker, if you're a knowledge worker in the United States and you sit at a computer all day, understand there are people in India and the Philippines that can do your job just as good as you can for 1/5. This is 5, and they're doing it for 1. That companies are going to shift that way. It's not good or bad. It's all neutral. You just have to understand that if you want a small farm, a homestead, or an estate to be more profitable for you over time, more prosperous for you over time, then you have to understand beyond the borders of your property those conditions, economic conditions mostly, that impact your well-being. And then you can hedge for it, you can plan for it, and then you can get the results you're looking for. Now, a shorter supply chain means that if you're selling farm goods or selling market garden or livestock, that you can gain more value. You can gain a better income from it. If you're simply growing fertilizer on your own property, then you're not impacted by the supply chain issues around fertilizer lately. This is a pretty big topic. I want to make sure you got the gist of it, and really understand that everything you've got, it has a long chain behind it, and really get the most out of what you've got. Quality furniture, quality housing, low energy consumption. All these things are going to serve you in the long run. Now, notice I didn't say anything about climate change or any of that kind of stuff. That I want to give you practical solutions. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead, where we help your small farm, homestead, or estate gain higher utility value. And the highest utility value is a zero waste system. You don't bring anything into it that you can't manage on site, and that you're managing things on site in an ecologically sound way. It's very useful. It's not a new concept. Back in the 1800s, 18th century, pretty much people didn't create any waste that had harmful plastics in it or harmful chemicals in it. They were able to live pretty self-sufficiently. But again, in a modern world, self-sufficient isn't the best way. You want to collaborate, you want to build relationships, and that's where we are going with this. Now, I have a whole list of more activities you can do, more things you can do to reduce waste. If you've got questions about this or anything else I cover, visit me at www.prosperityhomestead.org. Thanks for listening.